Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, again put together by all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find out more about us at virginiainstitute.org. If you go to tertiumquids.org, there are still some links there, but we found people were spending too much time emailing us, asking us how to spell tertium quids. So we set up virginiainstitute.org, and of course you can go to YouTube, and that's where we keep all of our archives of our Freedom and Prosperity Radio broadcasts, separated by guests, so you don't have to go through. You can pick and choose which areas you're interested in. And policy area here is energy. And the governance of it. And while everyone's been paying attention to the Second Amendment bills and the red flag laws, quite a bit has been going on in the energy management world. And Steve Hayner is on with us. He's been a journalist. He's been a businessman. He's been part of the government. He's been outside of the government. Pretty much the best possible way to be a contributing editor to Bacon's Rebellion, and senior fellow with the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, one of those few places in Virginia you're still able to utter Thomas Jefferson's name out loud. Welcome to the program, Steve. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. Welcome from, I bring you greetings from Sacramento on the James.
It really is quite stunning, isn't it? We discussed the Vexit movement a couple of weeks back. I talked to the legislator from West Virginia that had offered up the bill saying, hey, you know, this is still open from the 1860s. And somebody said, do you really think that could work? I said, well, if you got the D.C. statehood people to take Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads, and then and call it East Virginia, and then, you know, we even have bits of the Berlin Wall if you really want to complete the metaphor, but it would be...
I'm going to stand my ground and fight it out right here.
as many people have along the James in history. So... while all this has been going on about Second Amendment rights and due process, Dominion has been fighting this idea that the State Corporation Commission was going to take back over its oversight over its billing processes, despite records that we've been handed that show annual overbillings at Dominion. I still don't know if this is a good answer, if it's just an answer. Take us into some of the energy bills. Plus, of course, you've got the governor making his flowing rhetoric about being completely energy neutral by 2050. So I guess beginning with the State Corporation Commission in Dominion.
Well, the first bill you need to watch, and within a couple of days we may know its fate, is a bill that has bipartisan support, and it does change those rules. It would basically submit Dominion Energy Virginia to a full rate case in 2021, and the State Corporation Commission would have full authority to review its expenses, to order refunds, to cut their rates, the kind of things they have not been able to do over the last 10 years because the General Assembly has prevented it.
Mm-hmm. So
this bill basically restores the balance for at least one rate case in 21, and that bill passed the House on a pretty strong bipartisan 72, 75 votes, I think, in favor of it, and that's pending in a Senate committee where it does face a more challenging fate. So we'll know in a few days what happened to that bill. But that's actually a very positive development. Mm-hmm. It's a recognition by a lot of legislators that they've gone too far in turning the reins over to the power company and letting it do what it wants, basically a blank check. Now, that's the good news, and that bill still hasn't passed. But if it passes, that's the good news. Mm-hmm. The bad news is in furtherance of protecting the planet from the climate catastrophe, which of course everybody believes is happening, around us
in the next couple of weeks.
We are giving the General Assembly is giving the utilities a blank check on solar, a blank check on offshore wind, a blank check on energy storage, and again, while allowing the SCC maybe to do the 21 rate case, they are also saying the SCC cannot review these investments for reasonableness, prudence, cost. Mm-hmm. And so once the bill are stabilized after that 21 rate case, watch out, they're going to explode over the next 10 years.
It almost sounds
huge
like
Green New Deal type, Green New Deal legislation.
As you describe it, Steve, it almost sounds like it's the phrase that pays for 2020, quid pro quo. Okay, we're going to re-regulate your traditional electric utility. However, we're going to give you a blank check if you want to do this stuff, and we'll look the other way, almost as a backhanded incentive to say, forget about the coal-fired plants and let them fall by the wayside and go after solar because you can do whatever you want there. It's the wild, wild west.
Well, and again, if you are the favored electrical source, if you are solar, if you are wind, then right, there's very little regulation. They want it to happen. They don't care what it costs, and they will basically block the SEC from asking those famous inconvenient questions like, do we really need this, and can it be done more cheaply, and what if we did something else? You can't ask those questions. You're going to do what the General Assembly directs. It is in many ways very discouraging because almost everything they're doing could be done less expensively. Even if you buy the argument, even if you are convinced that coal plant is destroying the world and needs to be replaced with solar and wind, you don't have to give a blank check to the utilities to get it done.
Well, one of the things that I know that is very important in energy generation, I think it was really the battle between Edison and Tesla, was the role of social justice in energy generation. Steve, talk about how this bubbles up. I'm speaking with tongue in cheek, but how they managed.
You speak with tongue in cheek, but this bill that's pending actually requires, as the utilities are making decisions about where to place solar plants or other facilities, they're going to have to go through an environmental justice review, and they are being told, they can't have any disparate impact. I'm not sure they ever have had a disparate impact on low-income families or low-income localities, but again, this will all become part of the planning process, So again, it's the other thing they're doing, and this will be a huge change, is they're setting it up so that there will be means-tested electric rates. So if you are low income in Virginia, or certainly in the Dominion territory, you will be paying less, and the difference will be picked up by everybody else. They're setting up what they call a percentage of income payment plan, PIPP, percentage of income payment plan. So if you are a low-income Virginian in a Dominion territory, you don't have to pay more than 6% of your income for electricity. And if you spend 10% of your income instead, somebody else will pay the bill.
It's amazing to me that they find new and varied ways to incentivize poverty rather than doing anything about it, trying to invigorate. And I guess some of it is this idea of centralized businesses, the Dominion being, a utility, certainly, but we watch as our economy turns into more and more centralized, nationalized businesses rather than a billion mom and pop shops around towns and creating prosperity that way. The centralization in general it does that, but then now they're almost as if they're throwing in the white flag and saying, yeah, you're going to be poor, so we might as well come up with a way to make sure you're comfortable and at least your lights stay on.
Well, I think that, and I think also the Democrat legislators down here know that this is a key constituency, and they don't want that constituency up in arms when the electric bills go up 20-25%. So, the sad thing is, and the thing that people need to understand is that the game has not changed. And again, you're calling me from the Charlottesville area, and you've got a fellow up there named Michael Bills who formed an organization called Clean Virginia, which gave a lot of money to the Democrats and said, we're going to run Virginia differently. But they're not. They're not running Virginia differently at all. It's just a different crowd, but they're doing it the same way. They are still passing bills that limit the SEC's authority. They're still passing bills that create favorable conditions for who they want to create favorable conditions for. They are not letting the marketplace work. They are not letting the regulatory process work. And they're basically using political power instead of engineering know-how.
And massive intransparency on top of it to make it all possible. Bills founded a newspaper that actually was driven by the idea of restricting land use as well. So, you do one on top of the other, and eventually you're going to wind up back into a place where somebody is going to have to admit that this is all about population control, but they haven't quite gotten there yet. We're visiting with Steve Hayner. He's with Bacon's Rebellion and the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, senior fellow there, talking about some of the energy bills. One of the things I don't hear talked about in any of this is nuclear, and there's a big movement trying to get underway in Virginia regarding doing a better job of recycling or reusing these fuel rods so that we get closer to the French system of, at least 75% utilization rather than, and I discovered that most places like North Anna, when they finish with their fuel rods, they're stored on site anyway.
They are.
Are they just trying to set up nuclear power plants to be a problem, and so they can point to them and say, "See, this is why we shouldn't have it"?
Well, I think that's the problem. Basically, is nobody will take the fuel rods. They were developing the storage facility in Nevada, and Nevada said we don't want it here. So yes, all the nuclear plants around the country, the used fuel rods are basically stored on site in large pools of water. I mean, it's a very safe storage method, but it can't last forever, obviously. Mm-hmm. And at some point, the United States has to decide what to do with that fuel. Now, you're right. We should be reprocessing it. We should be doing what the French and others have done and extracting the usable energy and getting more fuel for more plants over the future. But again, ever since Jimmy Carter, that has been illegal in the United States. I don't know that that's changed. I don't think the federal government's changed its rules. Mm-hmm. So reprocessing is not an option right now. Now, if there's a movement out there to change that, I think that's a positive development. But I haven't seen any signs of it here in Richmond. Now, what you do see, you've had a couple bills this year that seem to be passing. They haven't finished yet, that are trying to make sure people recognize that nuclear is indeed carbon-free. If you want carbon-free energy, nuclear is a strong option. And you did see the president of Dominion, Tom Farrell, on CNBC last week talking about using small modular reactors. But I haven't heard a lot of talk from Dominion about building a new nuclear plant. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, the small modular ones are definitely getting discussion. Well, then another relatively clean is natural gas, and I guess the concern and the fight over the Atlantic Coast Pipeline has taken up some of this. Again, we're swinging back into the area of environmental justice and the pumping stations and whether or not this natural gas is going to be used in Virginia or even in the mid-Atlantic. What about natural gas and where that goes from what you're seeing, Steve?
Well, again, the irony is this bill that's passing, this clean energy bill that's passing, does not actually order Dominion or to close its gas plants. So those gas plants that they've built in the last 5 or 6 years would continue to operate and would need obviously a steady supply of natural gas. Mm-hmm. So the pipeline, there may still be a good argument for keeping the pipeline. Dominion has been able to beat back any legislation that would shut down the pipeline operation in Virginia. That's all kind of hanging on a big Supreme Court decision now about whether or not they can get the permit to cross the Appalachian Trail and the Blue Ridge Parkway, and that's all hung up at the Supreme Court now. But I think the long term, obviously, these folks do not want natural gas. They want wind, they want solar, they want storage. They think natural gas is unnecessary, and they think natural gas is destroying the planet. So obviously, they don't want to do it.
But they haven't been able, and I guess this is why they don't want the state corporation commission scrutiny is that, as far as I've seen over all these years, and I've talked with folks from all different angles on it, Chris Horner, and certainly the books he's written about the energy game, about how it's really not about clean energy, it's about just creating new ways to make money, things like that. None of this stuff seems to pencil out in terms of the cost to create versus the cost to sell, and so when you talk about a solar field the size of Louisa and it powers a dozen or so buildings, I'm exaggerating, but I mean it really is scalable. I mean it's and the wind farms that, ironically, the same areas of the Blue Ridge that don't want the Atlantic Coast Pipeline didn't want wind farms either.
They do not. They very much do not. Well, again, I mean, people have unrealistic expectations, and the legislators are subject to political pressure. The whole purpose of a state corporation commission, why it was created 100 years ago, was to get free of that political pressure, to court. They can't take campaign contributions. They can't attend political events. They're judges, and once they're on the court, they basically stay on the court for the rest of their careers. If you want a decision made on a rational basis, that's where you go. But
should be.
Again, nobody seems to want it made on a rational basis anymore.
Yeah, it's about why would you give up the political opportunities? Steve, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get into something that was shared with me. And again, this is all the stuff that's going on, while you were worried about the Second Amendment and due process and the First Amendment even. When you talk about weapons of war, that phrase has bothered us here. You wrote about the state is looking into having company payrolls opened up to look for bias.
That's an amazing bill.
Well, explain this to me, because here in our flagship city, we have a Human Rights Commission that annually gets $200,000 and has found over 5 years exactly, carry the 0 instances of human rights violations, and they've been looking. So is this just doubling down and trying to find, boogeymen where they don't exist?
I think that's a fair statement, and again, it's driven, I think, by political considerations. You have the Attorney General of Virginia. What the bill does, it's House Bill 624. It's still alive. It passed the House on a straight party line vote, like 54-44, something like that. And it would require every employer in the state with 100 employees to file an annual report with the state on all of those employees, how much they make, are they white, black, green, race, gender, how long have they worked for the company, what was their last employee evaluation score, everything you would possibly need to go rummaging through the data trying to find evidence of bias against gender or bias against race. And they would turn this data over to the Attorney General's office that would be free to manipulate it, study it, slice it and dice it, come up with a report, and then prosecute. The Human Rights Office of the Attorney General's office could prosecute. And again, what they could do with that data is they could share it with a local Charlottesville Human Resources or Human Rights Council and say, hey, here's a Charlottesville company, here's the data, why don't you go sue them instead of us?
Or heaven's sake, leak it to a local newspaper or something like that.
Well, I mean, there's nothing in this bill that says the data is protected from the Freedom of Information Act. There's nothing in this bill that says the data is protected, that your personal information in the bill is protected. I mean, it's really kind of ironic because they're passing legislation down here that says as you hire people, you cannot ask what their salary history has been, okay?
Right.
This bill gives the government their salary history. I mean, after they've had this report for 4 or 5 years, they'll have a salary history on everybody in the Commonwealth of Virginia who works for a company of 100 employees or more. That's millions of Virginians.
Well,
I am amazed this bill has not died already. I think there's a chance it will not survive in the Senate over the next couple days.
Where does a bill like this
come from? It's a really bad bill.
I mean, I've watched some of the impassioned debate over the minimum wage increase, ironically by Democrats saying they want to protect, the family for I guess the first time, or it became a convenient word to use in their statement. Is that where this is coming from? Some of the big city blue enclaves of Virginia, where this kind of stuff is.
It's Chris Hurst from Blacksburg, for goodness sakes.
My gosh,
who put the bill in? I think there's the belief on their part that there is out there still major gender bias. That he gave a speech on the floor in which he said women make 79 cents for every dollar made by a man, which is a statistic I've seen, but it's also mostly explained by what jobs they have and other things other than, I think the vast majority of companies now understand that if they've got two employees doing the same job, one male, one female, they pay them the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the days when teachers got paid differently if they were female and married are gone. And so I'm not sure there's that much for them to find anymore in that regard unless they can just make some kind of statistical case.
It's sad to think of a news reporter, doing a piece like that. But I guess, a journalist mind is working on, wouldn't this make a juicy story if Company X or Company Y could be shown of this? With tongue back in cheek for a moment, in the era of gender fluidity, how could one prove that, maybe I'm male today and maybe I'm female tomorrow?
Well, that's another issue. But I did, in my Bacon's Rebellion post, I did ask that question: why are we doing only the two genders? That was somewhat tongue in cheek. But then again, not long ago, my wife applied for a job with a state university, and I think she was presented with 16 choices on the application under gender. So I'm not making that up.
No,
16 choices.
I laugh rather than cry there. What now? Who would oversee this? Would this be the State Corporation Commission again overseeing this?
This would be the Office of Attorney General's Division of Human Rights.
So, as I understand it, in most cases in Virginia, somebody would have to swear out a warrant. If there were going to be charges filed for, let's say, an assault or any sort of criminal case, in order to get law enforcement involved, somebody has to make a call. And this completely throws that on its head and says, no, the law enforcement can just go out and decide, round up the usual suspects.
Well, this was something, there's a federal report that is also required of these employers that gets into some of this data. I think the federal report's a lot less intrusive, but that goes back to the Obama administration, and the Trump folks have been trying to kill it, but the courts haven't let them kill it. But again, this is the government basically going out looking for things. Look, you're going to see, again, there's half a dozen bills down here this year that are dealing with various forms of perceived discrimination, race, gender, national origin, public accommodation. But again, what the bills really are doing is creating a cause of action. There's a bunch of bills here that are creating new ways for businesses or individuals to get sued.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's mad at you and you think they did something for some biased reason, they can now sue you under these bills, and they can receive attorney's fees and punitive damages under these bills.
Well, I also imagine it could.
And there's another one that basically lets the attorney general bring charges and collects $50,000 fines.
So it could be a
again,
government
the Human Rights Division at the Attorney General's office, they're going to be busy.
Yeah,
because they're going to have a lot of people calling up asking for a complaint, filing complaints.
Pretty
but
good.
They're also going to run around looking for stuff on their own.
Pretty good work if you're running for governor there. And I guess there's no small part of this that we can't look ahead, and it's Fairfax versus Herring as of now, and I guess Senator Chase has thrown her hat into the ring as far as the GOP is concerned. But this is the kind of thing that an attorney general would love to go out there and say, look at all the and really campaign to the poor communities and say, whether or not this actually helps you or not, look at me and what I'm doing, vote for me.
Well, again, he has been an advocate for some time on the hate crimes legislation front, and that's a controversial area. But obviously, a lot of folks, a lot of Democrats, that appeals to them. So yes, I think, and I don't want to discount the fact that he probably believes it's a huge issue. But whether or not it's something that actually is a huge problem in Virginia, the actual police reports don't indicate it.
We'll share a link to the story.
Activist government. Look, some people believe government exists to do stuff. They're here to help us, and that's the folks who are in charge in Richmond right now.
Is there, in any of these bills, we talked about Creed deeds a little bit and the Second Amendment votes he had placed, and along with Chap Peterson and John Edwards, are there those Democrats that could break from party lines in some of this stuff and help put these away, at least for now, until...
It's more likely in the Senate than the House. They're showing a lot of discipline in the House on the Democratic side, and the very progressive faction is definitely running that caucus, and the new speaker very much running that caucus. So in the Senate, there's a little more independent action. I think there are some Democrats who have. What concerns me is what I don't see among a lot of these new folks. And remember, what a high percentage have only been here for 2 years,
right.
One term, maybe two. I don't see a lot of business people. I don't see a lot of people with real world business experience on the Democratic side. There are some still on the Senate side, not as many on the House side. And I think, and like any fever, I think the fever tends to run hot and then maybe it breaks. So if there are some adverse economic impacts, if a year from now they're seeing that a lot of companies are closing in Virginia or moving jobs out of Virginia, or companies that might be coming have decided to go somewhere else, there may be some realization that they've gone too far. We'll see, but. I don't really expect that to happen very soon.
Well, I know you'll be there writing for Bacon's Rebellion and, of course, with the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy. Steve Hayner, thanks so much for spending this weekend with us on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
My pleasure.
And thank you for tuning in as well across the Commonwealth. Again, this will go up along with all our other archives on our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. Until next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.